Welcome to Cultivate the Ordinary podcast, curious conversations for the anxious, frustrated, and bored. I'm Travis.
And I'm Jessie. So often we're held captive by screens, schedules, and media that's mind-numbing and polarizing. This leaves us seeing dimly through a fog. We want to spark more imagination and a better awareness of God's presence in the everyday.
Join us on a fun journey of discovery and curiosity as we look at the ordinary through the lenses of joy, wonder, beauty, and hope. Hey, welcome to another episode. So today's going to be different. It's just going to be me flying solo. It's what they say is a solo cast, I believe. So it could be a lot of fun. It could also be like pogo sticking on ice. You just never know what's going to happen. Just a couple things before we get into the topic today, really grateful for you guys listening and sharing the podcast or giving us feedback. Really love it. So always reach out, send a message on whatever platform you would like. And also leaving reviews and ratings is huge. Definitely helps the podcast, and it's also fun to read what's impacted you. So please continue to do that, or do that if you haven't. We'd love that. And thanks for continuing on, those of you that have continued to listen to these episodes. So also, I am on a podcast for the national nonprofit I work with, America's Kids Belong. We started a new podcast called the Foster Friendly Podcast, and it's about all things in the space of foster care. Really inspiring stories, ways to get involved, just inspiring people out there and the things that they're doing. So even though you aren't necessarily directly involved right now with foster care, listen to this podcast. You think you'll be entertained, you'll also be inspired, and you may find yourself finding your way to do something, because everyone can. And so that's something else. So check that out. It's called the Foster Friendly Podcast. So today, in the episode today, I've been kind of trying to think through how I'd even describe this, but it's a little bit of a mix of the topic being, I think, how to honor those that we've lost, how to honor loved ones, maybe dear friends, but also just processing lingering grief. That can be really hard and challenging, and I think there's healthier ways to do it than other ways, but there's also no perfect right way for anybody. So I think there's a little bit for me today of just, I guess, sharing vulnerably, which isn't always easy for me, but trying to do that. I may even cry, which I haven't had a cry in a long time until recently, and I don't say that with a badge of honor, but I just have really been emotional. Lately, I'm not entirely sure why, but I do know why in some ways. It's kind of a confluence of things where, I've had some friends recently who have lost loved ones. My son, Jay, our oldest, is going off to college. And, it's sent me in a tailspin of just so much emotion. And just thinking how it changes a house, what a big deal it is, all of the exciting parts, but just the loss, of him and our sort of daily presence. And, but interestingly, and this is more, I think, connecting with the topic today, but I think it's also connected me, even with Jay, of memories of me going off to college. 45 now, so that was quite a while back, but like in, 98 or the fall of 98 maybe, or whatever it was, going off to college and thinking about my story and my parents, my dad, and kind of that journey. And so those are some of the things at the backdrop I know kind of stirring around and that I've been feeling, and again, feeling pretty emotional. So a really great quote that inspires me, and I think about sort of just in the day-to-day, the things that we all kind of face in life. Kurt Vonnegut, the writer, said, "Enjoy the little things in life, for one day you'll look back and realize they were the big things." Man, I think that's just such a great line to keep in front of us to remember, that, when we look back at times of memories with our loved ones and those that have, we've lost, it often really is it was those little things, that, of course the big things are great and stuff, but I just think so often our memories take us to these small moments that were maybe at the time super underrated, didn't seem like it was as big as it was, and then that ends up being the big thing. And so, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about, it's been a little over 2 years now that I've lost my dad, and, I can go days and days of, really not a lot of emotion around that, or deep sadness. Certainly think about him a lot. And then there can be out of the blue, you just get rocked, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, I think one of the things is, I think that I've learned in my life at this point is how grief and sadness, when we lean into those things, can really slow us down. They can help us, for those of us that are really independent, and that it can really lean us into needing others, which is a good thing, and certainly needing God's presence. A long time back, a thought hit me that I've said, where it's really through the blurry lens of tears do we have the most clarity in life. Thought of moments of intense sadness and just kind of, whether crying or whatever, but just, it was almost like through the blurry eyes of all that sadness, even though it was cloudy, somehow, I don't know, maybe God's nearness is more, but somehow light can break through in a way that it just also felt clarity in ways of maybe not having all the answers, but maybe somehow being more connected to God's presence. So there was definitely something about sadness. I think there's a holy aspect to our grief, when God meets us there. But I guess I've been thinking, one of the things that I wanted to kick around, in this, I was gonna say this conversation, I guess I'm having myself here, but is just the need to mark an absence with something also physical. One memory I have is the day that we lost Dad, and I picture, the conversations and the tears and all the leaning in together as a family and all that kind of stuff. And, the day just continues to go about what happens and what you do. But I remember, coming back, after all being together, and, entering into Dad's room. And what I remember was light was low, and on his bed, the funeral business that came to get Dad's body, because he passed away at our home, and had left this rose on the bed, and it was just a plastic rose and whatever, but it's interesting how much solace and how much beauty I saw in that physical expression of something beautiful laying in the place he slept, in his bed. And it was a small thing, but it was something that kind of, I noticed became a thing I needed the next several weeks to beyond. I remember having a thought in my head of, what do you do what do you do with his room? There was this sense of almost like having a shrine of his stuff, just the chair and pictures. And I think I did. I think we set up something, a space to come and kind of sit there and be with his stuff, or some of his things were pictures. I remember, the first moment of sort of eulogizing Dad at our church. There was kind of an impromptu thing. It was more of just almost an announcement, but a way, I think, for me to process it. a week later and going up there. But I brought a couple things. I brought up his. He was a hotshot firefighter, forest firefighter, and so I had his vest. I think I brought out his axe. They would use. Those were like these things that represented his strength, and needed those things. I remember when we did his funeral as memorial, making these just monster pictures of big moments, or whether maybe it was his face sitting by a fire or just something, but these giant, they were like poster size things, and just these big kind of monuments to him and who he was, and not needing those types of things now. I'm glad we have them now. It seems almost like, what kind of a house did we have to have that you'd have these in? Or it almost seems a little strange now, but at the time, really needing those big physical representations of him. And it just feels like there's something like physical that we're trying to almost, for me, not exchange, but sort of be a placeholder to, I don't know, get to the next step, like you're gone now, Dad, but there's this giant picture of your face that's still here. And I can look at you, and you're with me in that picture. And so, yeah, I've just kind of been thinking around, the way physical types of things seem to have so much meaning. Where my work desk, I have a big picture or a big frame, and then we kind of got replica jerseys. I had replica jerseys made of what my dad's high school football number and his name, and then within that frame is also something I wrote about him playing football and his resolve and stuff like that. And so every day I look up at this picture, and then I have a quote of his that I'll never forget, even in the depths of his dementia. He had just a profound moments came out, and this one time he said, "I'm not a leader who loves to talk. I'm someone who loves to do." And man, that was an emblem, of his life. Just that is, and it was an interesting choice of words too, to say, I'm not a leader who loves to talk. I am someone who loves to do. And he would be he'd be the one that, often leaders, I think, can get the praise, and things. And it's sometimes it's the people behind the leaders that are really what pulls things off. But anyway, with Dad, it was just, that was it. And so I also have that framed up there. But so there is something so powerful about a physical, representation in some way of our loved ones, and and how daily that can sort of be a gift or a way to keep their memory alive. And another thing that I'm really been thinking about lately, as I'm thinking about my dad and memories around his life. The great writer Marcel Proust has this beautiful, beautiful line. Here's what he says. He says, "People do not die for us immediately, but remain bathed in a sort of aura of life which bears no relation to true immortality, but through which they continue to occupy our thoughts in the same way as when they were alive. It is as though they were traveling abroad." And I think of that so often. There's this sense in which, I don't think death was, as we know, wasn't the original plan for humanity. And so I think that, I think C.S. Lewis talked about, when we have this deep feeling inside of us as that things aren't as they should be, that that there is this that points to something, that points to we weren't designed or God's original design wasn't, some of these broken things that, through the fall and all of that sort of unravels some of this that happens. But I think of like goodbyes, there's that same thought comes to mind of feeling like, goodbyes are really hard for me sometimes. And again, that also doesn't feel like it feels right that's how life should be, is having that experience, that the pain in that experience. So, but back to that quote from Proust is, it does feel like there's this mystery, it feels as if, we believe, my dad knows Jesus, and, so of course he's, in a great place that has no time, and it couldn't be a better experience. But at the same time, there's this weird feeling of like, it just feels like he's just gone somewhere abroad, traveling. I mean, there is something about death that just, the foreignness to loss that just, for some, you always are looking, they're still coming home. Surely they're coming home. That horror of that loss where you're thinking of that. But I guess I just love that quote of thinking about like that, our thoughts and memories of them, are this way it's more like that they're traveling abroad and coming home. They just aren't, they're just gone. Then it is that, immortality thing, because we are human, we are, and so we're as human creatures, it makes sense that that's what, our predominant thought feels like. But also kind of thinking about time and space with loss, it also is interesting, I've found too, and maybe many of you can relate to this, of where, kind of back again to that catching you off guard with like your breath gets knocked out of like, oh wow, I haven't even thought of, this person I've lost until this moment or this place. And it's just like, wow, I would never have guessed that, And so it's really kind of been interesting for me of where, I find that places so like, for instance, like Dad spent a bunch of his, the last chapters of his life, 4 years living us with this house while we helped care for him. And it was this slow progressive death. And then he eventually passed away here. But what's weird is that though I can be in places here where we would have spent a lot of time together, and especially at the end of his life, it's going to places that I don't have, I've sort of lost some emotional connection to or memories to, but what I do picture is Dad, like not having dementia and being fully, like it was a different chapter of his life. And it's almost like going by there, you're almost like part of you is like, are they going to be there? I mean, because there's a place in town they used to live before this house, and that was at the height of Dad, caring for Jeremy and all of that. And like, if I were to drive down by that house, it would almost be like, it would feel like he's there. He's in the front yard, or because there's just something about certain places where, because of the memories or what how they were or what that was, it's different. It's like when I go back to the farm, the area where I grew up in North Dakota, and it just being around, where we lived in our town and all of that, like, yeah, like going by the grain elevator randomly, I would think of Dad and the height of his time as a farmer, like coming through here in a truck. It's like, so there's a haunting of those places that it's like, it sparks something in you of like, wow, I mean, how, and so it is interesting how time and place and spaces that you may not think that you would trigger aching thoughts of their loss do. And it's not always the ones that totally make sense. But yeah, I think, as I started this episode talking about, all these like converging things of where I think I'm getting emotional lately of missing dad. I do think, as I started talking about like with college and Jay going off to college, just the memories of we were working on his car, it's an older car and needed the muffler replaced, and it was cool to get to do that with Jay and kind of teach him a little bit of that. But it just took me back to my own dad, and we're always fixing up old cars, and that going off to college. I mean, it's not like dad necessarily had all the, wasn't giving a inspiring speech necessarily to me, although at times there probably were those moments. But it so much of it was back to the doing, the demonstrating, the showing the love, the, we're gonna get your car running good. And so I guess like doing that with Jay, it's interesting how things trigger in you too, that from your own story, and now me being the dad, but looking back at those memories with my dad. And so I know, yeah, that's definitely been another thing lately. That's kind of triggered some of the emotion. And yeah, I don't know, maybe this has been a bit rambling, and I don't think that, I certainly don't have all the answers. I don't have a lot of great answers for those of you listening that are really struggling with grief and loss, just to know that you're not alone, that the things you're feeling are real. Lean into them and talk to people. I hope you have friends that can just sit and listen, and can share. You can share when things hit you that you just need to say, and how you're feeling with all this stuff. I do want to kind of say a beautiful closing line from John Henry Newman, where he talks about loss, and maybe this will also be something consoling, but he says, there are wounds of the spirit which never close and are intended in God's mercy to bring us nearer to him and to prevent us leaving him by their very perpetuity. Such wounds then may almost be taken as a pledge, or at least as a ground for a humble trust, that God will give us the great gift of perseverance to the end. This is how I comfort myself in my own great bereavements. I think as Americans and Westerners, we, when it comes to things beyond the intellectual, it is a place, there's a gap there. I do think for many of us, finding rituals, disciplines, even physical types of representations to help with memories or to kind of be of assistance is not a thing that for a lot of us is common. So it's a little bit more foreign. And I think when, you think of how God has wired us with all of our senses, that any way in which we can, integrate and use more of our senses, even around, I think, processing loss and grief is really good and healthy because it's the whole of us. We didn't just lose a dad intellectually, that we regain sort of hope and consolation in, just thinking memories. I mean, there is something about place and physical things and, reminders in that way. And so I hope that maybe that stirs something in you as we all process this and our own unique ways of how we can, sit with good and sad memories. Someone once said something like, you're not truly dead until the ripples of your life no longer touch people. And I think that's a big part of this too, is that, there is a gift that we continue to gain from the presence of those that we've lost. And we think of the things that they have taught us, inspired us. What was it about their life? That was a monument in some way, not just for them, but for us to maybe change who we are, or to challenge us or whatever. Pericles has a great line where he says, "What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives of others." And man, that's ultimately what's happening here is those that we've lost and those that we're honoring through memory and trying to dwell on who they were. They've deeply done something into our hearts that has changed us, and that's such a gift, and that's a gift that we get to do as well to others. But really, really impacted by that thought of the true monument is what we leave on others' hearts, not what they come to read in a cemetery. So with all that said, this is very rambly. I don't know. Hopefully there was some value in something here, as if nothing else, but to say I'm 2 years out of losing my dad and still sorting things out. So I'm going to close with a way that I process or have processed grief and loss and honoring the memory of my dad. That's through writing. And my brother Dan has a newsletter called Joy and Despair about my brother Jeremy's life. Reach out if you'd like to be on the newsletter list. But it's really about Jeremy's life and things happening in his life. But anyway, this last May was the 2-year anniversary of losing my dad. I was Jeremy's caregiver for 8 years at the end of Dad's life, well into when he should have just been relaxing in retirement. But I had the honor of writing a special tribute to my dad and his life. And so I'm going to close this podcast reading this. Again, this is as much for me to just kind of deal with my grief in this way, but also I think there's some inspiring things about my dad's life that touched a lot of people. So it certainly helped form who I am today. But here's what it says. 2 years ago this May, our dad, Mark Vongsness, passed away. He was battling late-stage dementia and had been in hospice at home for over a year. While his dwindling words had fully left him a few months prior, he continued to share his last remaining gift to the world, his amazing smile. A smile that when you saw it, you immediately felt anchored and safe in a world full of so much noise, chaos, and distraction. His smile finally faded too. We knew the curtains of his life were drawing closer to a close, but no one would have guessed the final scripted moments that God, the master playwright of our lives, had planned when he set the stage for Dad's final scene. Before we look at that, let's rewind back to the beginning. The Spanish philosopher Jose Ortega y Gasset once said, "Tell me the landscape in which you live, and I will tell you who you are." Dad was profoundly shaped by the beautiful, windy prairie flatlands of North Dakota. Writer Kathleen Norris described it as a place of little rain and few trees, dry summer winds and harsh winters, a land rich in sky and surprises. It was here Dad was born and raised. It was here his imagination and sense of adventure was fostered. It was here he farmed, and while Dad was growing wheat, God was growing Dad. Growing him to face the toughest challenge of his life 10 years later. In 2009, 3 of his sons were in a horrific rollover car wreck in Montana. Jeremy and Dan in separate ICUs fighting for their lives. The first time Dad showed up to see Dan at the Bozeman Hospital, he wore his faded John Deere hat. It was time to get to work, and work he did. After helping Dan get stabilized after his ICU stay, his efforts to be there with Jeremy had begun. Having Jeremy go to a nursing facility was not an option for Dad. However, a dark, unknown path lay ahead. Already in his 60s, he would go on to give his life to caring 24/7 for his son for nearly a decade. Jeremy's life, though limited, blossomed. Dad's started to wither. No doubt this great sacrifice accelerated Dad's dementia and shortcut his life. But he wouldn't have it any other way. He never counted Jeremy out. His belief, resilience, and dedication to his son shined a light on a dark trail when few others could see the way. When he finally stopped caring for Jeremy at age 68, he had a team behind him, following a well-trodden trail in his footsteps. That legacy of care and dedication continues today. Dad loved Jesus and loved people with a quiet intensity. He lived with a vulnerability that shined. He was a teacher, a foreign missionary, a firefighter, a farmer, a mountain climber, a handyman, a caretaker, a treasure. A man who lived life that was far more show than tell. Dad's life's final scene. The lighting was low. Dad had previously been alone in his room, breathing heavily. I walked in to check on him. My heart sank. I knew almost immediately he was gone. His head was tilted down. There was no more labored breathing. Only the sound of a song playing quietly in the background. It is well with my soul. There was also one curious set piece in the scene that caught my eye. Dad's final breaths took place as he sat in Jeremy's old wheelchair. The very chair he spent so much time pushing Jeremy in. It would be his own earthly chariot of sorts to heaven. God's wink and nod to a father's life that was so intertwined in service and love to his son. Curtains close. So as you're, like me, processing grief at times, ebbs and flows, we all come into hard seasons. We have unexpected and expected losses. Life is beautiful and heart-wrenching, and it's the shadows and the light all in one. Just pray wherever you're at in all of this that God is with you and you're not walking alone, and that you have friends who can listen and be there, and you can let them know that you need them. So have an awesome day. Thanks for listening to the podcast today. I hope you found something helpful, hopeful, or thought-provoking. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to any resources mentioned in the podcast. And we also have links in the notes for our own resources to check out. We would really love to hear from you. And we're also really grateful for your support by sharing the podcast episodes with your friends and family and leaving a rating and review. May we all regain and maintain our wonder, hope, and inspiration as we look at our ordinary through new and fresh eyes.